Okay, thank you, Jacqueline. Welcome all of you to reflection on COP26 in Glasgow by a person who was actually there, and he's going to give us his reflections on what he saw and experienced. Now, what we're going to do here, I'm going to briefly introduce Rob Samulack, who is the person who was there, and then I'm going to carry on a little interview with him. And after that's over, you will all have a chance to pose any questions or comments that you'd like to. So that will be our schedule. By the way, my name is Eric Schiller. I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion in Ottawa, which most of you know anyway, but in case there's a few new people. So let's get started. And let me first introduce my friend, Rob Samulack. I've known Rob for a number of years. He's been very active with our OSAG, which stands for Ottawa Water Study Action Group. And we've been working on the issue of single-use plastic for years, about, I don't know, 15 years or something. And
I wasn't around with it for 15 years.
I know. He's not old enough to get on that long, but in the last few years, he's been active in it. And but now I know that he's an unusual guy, actually. He is an engineer who became a nurse. Now, how about that for something? He decided, so he has both of these things. He has this analytical or rational mind, and he's also got the caring attitude of a nurse, a male nurse. And recently he approached me and he says he's actually thinking of going to COP26. And I found that quite unusual. And he did go. He's obviously got a family with a couple of kids, which we may hear in the background as he's talking. But so what I'm going to do is just start a little interview with him and see if we can learn what a person at the COP26 saw and experienced. So, Rob, you went with a group called COP, which stands for Christian Climate Observer Program. So I wonder if you could start out by telling us what is this program and maybe also whatever motivated you to go over there and take part in COP26. What was your motivation? Why did you go?
So the COP program, it's a non-denominational international group of Christians who are interested in climate action. It's organized as more of a training program to train Christians on how to be climate advocates and activists. So who was in the program? There was people in the program from, I think the youngest was 19 or 21, and the oldest was 79. So a lot of people in university, first year university, second year university, people doing their master's degrees, their PhDs, just finished their PhDs. There is an old Presbyterian minister who is a Vietnam draft dodger, and he's heavily involved in it, and everybody in between. People from Canada. From Canada, we had people from BC, Manitoba, and a couple of us from Ontario. Several places in the United States were represented. Argentina was represented, France, Philippines, Germany, all over the UK, even North Macedonia. There was somebody from North Macedonia there. So all of us were Christians, and it was trying to put our faith in action. That's why we were there. For a long time, I've been an environmentalist in varying capacities. I started off in caring about the environment back when I was in Scouts, and growing up, occasionally writing a newspaper article. And then I got more active with environmental initiatives in the last 5 or so years, doing traffic calming projects and bike infrastructure projects, and OSAG with Eric. And I've tried to do my part, never perfect at it, but I've tried to do my part. And then this summer, with seeing all the smoke coming from out west, seeing a village that was burnt to the ground. All of this after Ottawa has had floods and tornadoes, but the smoke and just like, is every summer after this going to be filled with smoke like this? And what are my kids going to be growing up into? Every summer is getting hotter. Heat waves are getting longer. People are dying from heat waves. This summer I got a little depressed about it. Well, fairly depressed about it actually. And I needed something to do and I prayed about it. And a couple weeks later, there was a newsletter that came out from a Christian environmental organization called Arosha. And they advertised for this opportunity to go. And at first I was on the fence about what can I actually do going there, flying there and using burning all that fuel and those emissions to go there. But I went there trusting that there was something I would learn from it, and there was, and I learned a lot from it. So it was quite an eye-opening experience.
Okay, good. Now, yeah, you mentioned you got on an airplane. How do you, when people say, oh, all these people jumping on airplanes to go to this environmental conference, blah, 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 and go back in their airplanes. Well, how do you answer people that say, I don't know about that. I don't know whether it's worth it. What are your thoughts there?
So that was one of the biggest reservations I had about going. However, there were 40,000 people who were official observers or delegates who were part of COP. It felt like a giant university campus. International people all over the place working hard in random little corners, typing away articles to go places. The first 2 days the world leaders were there, and it was almost 2 hours waiting in line to get through security and get in. And that sounds really terrible, but it gave the opportunity where you're standing beside random strangers. There's nothing else to do other than to talk to the person next to you. And I talked to people from all over the world there. I talked to people from Cote d'Ivoire, from where else? Sierra Leone. Talked to somebody from Protect Our Winters, POW, which is a skier and snowboarder advocacy group. So there's all these people there, 40,000 people, most of whom, not all, but most of whom want climate action to happen and are on the same page with it. And there's all this brainstorming that happens because everyone's together. And you sit down for lunch and there's somebody there from a climate financing firm in England, just random, and then you say like, oh, I'm here because I'm with this program, and you strike up a conversation and you share things that you wouldn't otherwise share, because in our virtual world, we're very siloed. There's 9, how many are here? 10 people here coming to this, but of those 10 people, I'm talking, but all those other people in the background, they're not connecting as well. So when you're actually there in person, all those 10 people, they're connecting with the person next to them and asking, why are you here and what are you bringing to the table? So there's that aspect. So it had a lot of benefit going in person.
Okay.
So but because of all the emissions that we did produce, we did carbon offsetting. We used a climate stewards, and the climate stewards philosophy is first you reduce your emissions, and if you don't feel that you can reduce the emission, then you offset it. So everybody, part of the program fee went towards offsetting. And where does that offsetting money go? It goes to reforestation programs in Africa, clean cook stove programs. So rather than burning wood and tearing up the forests, they're using other fuels, and it's also decreasing lung disorders and making people healthier. So that's where the money is going from, and otherwise these people probably wouldn't have the money to fund these programs.
Okay, so you went as a member of this delegation, the COP group, But okay, what did you do all day? Did you just wander around, or did you go to meetings? And maybe what was a highlight or two of the things you remember doing? What does a delegate do at these things?
So with this program in particular, it was very, very open-ended. You had to attend a morning devotional every morning where we prayed about what was going to happen, and then following that had news for the day. But other than that, you were free to spend your day doing as you wish. You had to contribute to a newsletter for one day of the week. So most people, they were up and they were out the door by 9, and many of them were coming back in the door 9 o'clock that night, having spent the whole day going to as many meetings as they can, making as many connections as they can, writing articles to their local papers. I spoke with CBC Ottawa at one point. Many people writing op-eds for their individual papers. There was somebody from Philippines, and she was doing about 5 presentations a day. She's a full-time climate activist. We had another lady from Environmental Buddies Zimbabwe, and she's a reforestation. She runs a reforestation NGO, and she was trying to get Zimbabwe government on board with her. So she was constantly going after them. I was going to as many Canadian things as I could and as many healthcare things as I could to try to learn where my energy is best directed. So
What kind of Canadian representatives did you bump into?
So Mike Morris, anybody heard of Mike Morris here? He's the new Kitchener Center Green Party MP. He's getting sworn in on, actually he's been sworn in. He's already been sworn in, I think. He met with us for an hour in a place in the Blue Zone, just an informal talk. There was people there from the UK, from all over the world in our group talking to them. And he was teaching them about Canadian politics and how the Canadian political structure is. And then comparing why both him and Stephen Guilbeault, they went into politics at the exact same time. Guilbeault chose the Liberal Party and Mike chose the Green Party. And he explained the rationale between that and why he went into politics in general. So he went into politics because the politicians are the one who can change the game book. Anybody can play the game, and we're all playing the game as best we can, but politicians can go in and make systemic change. So that's why he went in himself. Contrast that to, you may have seen in one of the slides, there was another leader of an opposition party who was there. He took a selfie with me, but he didn't want to talk in any length. I walked to a meeting. There's only one meeting where I got to go where we got to ask questions to the Canadian government delegation. And I happened to go through security at the same time as Elizabeth May. And I spent 15 minutes walking with her and talking with her on the way to the meeting, her and her husband, John Kidder. And afterwards, I got in touch with a doctor who's leading the charge on environment and climate and healthcare, Dr. Courtney Howard. And just the connection, having that, like I wouldn't have made that connection sitting at home.
Now, you told me that not everybody there was in favor of combating. I mean, there were some people kind of in the opposition. What was that? What would that be?
So there was a BBC article that said there were 503 oil lobbyists who were there.
Whoa. What were they doing?
What weren't they doing? I don't know exactly what they were doing. I didn't get the opportunity to talk to them directly, but the article speaks a lot. One of the things, one of the takeaways that I really learned that I hadn't seen from the Canadian perspective was the aspect of climate justice and climate financing. So here in Canada and in the developed world, well, we don't have all the money in the world. We're relatively rich nations, and we can implement programs like bike infrastructure, sanitation, and various programs. We shouldn't be putting money into the oil subsidies. If that oil subsidy money went into other things, that would go much further. But we have money to put into programs. In Africa and other developing nations, they don't have the money to do a lot of those things. And there's a lot of injustices with that. So, for instance, Lytton burned to the ground out in BC, but they were able to stay in emergency shelters for months on end. All the people who are being flooded out, they have somewhere to go where our social safety net will protect them. Contrast that with the developing world. When a natural disaster strikes, they don't have access to that. And that creates climate migration and climate refugees and all the refugee health implications that go along with that. So the Syrian war, many people are now saying, was caused by 10 years of drought, the worst drought in 900 years. And look at all the problems that the war in Syria caused, not just in Syria, but all of Europe, and the rise of xenophobia and the alt-right and all those other problems. So if we don't tackle problems in other countries, if we don't tackle climate change in other countries as well, that's going to have carryover back to Canada. So with climate financing, there are loan programs to African and developing nations, but a lot of those programs, they have 3 times the interest rates that we would have here in Canada. So they're indebted that much more, and they have that much less money to pay it off with. So they're trying to change the system to be more grant-based. Starting in 2020, under the Paris Agreement, there was supposed to be $100 billion of climate financing to the Global South, and that was supposed to continue every year, and that has not been delivered. So I went to what's called a stunt inside the official blue zone that you have to go through security to get into by a bunch. It was called the ACT Alliance, which was a Christian action network, and a lot of it was around climate justice, because there's all this talk about adaptation and mitigation in developed world, but for the developing world, they're screwed.
So we all know that the climate crisis is global, and there's a lot of poor people out there, desperate people who are already experiencing a lot of problems. And it sounds like you at the COP conference met a number of these. Well, what proportion of the people there would you say, this is a guess I know, seem to be from the still developing countries that are on the front lines of the suffering due to climate change? How many, what percent would you say were there? I know it's harder for them to get there in the first place, but were they there in representative numbers or what?
They were representative, but they weren't in the same numbers.
Yeah.
There was people from all over the world in line, but I met a lot of Canadians in line.
Yeah.
The amount of people that I met from other countries was a lot lower. My friend from Zimbabwe, who is part of our program, said they sent 100 people from the Zimbabwe delegation, but of those 100 people, they were going to mainly to party because it was a trip out of Zimbabwe. They weren't actually present.
Oh dear.
But that's when you get in with governments that don't have the same accountability we have here in Canada.
Was that permissible for a delegate? I mean, you sound like a lot was up to the individual delegates.
Well, it depends who you're going with,
Yeah.
right? It depends completely on who your organization is. If you're going with the Zimbabwe government, well, then you're going with the Zimbabwe government. It's whatever they permit. Okay. Under the Christian Climate Observers, there was no specific pressure to do something specific, but everybody was constantly writing articles and reaching out, or I would say about half of the group, especially the older part of the group, were doing articles and were trying to work within the system. And I'd say that the younger university age people, a lot of them spent a lot of the time going to the outside events, protests, and one person in particular, she spent almost her whole time at the protests.
Yeah.
So
Where did the protests take place? Outside the blue, this blue zone is the officially you're a member. Were the protests outside, I guess?
So there were two official zones. There was the blue zone on one side of the River Clyde, and you had to go through something equivalent to airport security to get into, and you had to have an official observer badge to get in, or official party delegate badge. On the other side of the River Clyde, even though there's a short bridge right there, you had to go all the way around to it, was the green zone. And that was a public zone where they had other talks going on. But any member of the public could go into it. They also had to go through security, but you could get a ticket and go into it. Inside the blue zone, there was the two major plenary rooms where about 1,000 people each could sit in them, and that's where the world leaders would talk. And then there's a whole 20 some odd rooms where there were negotiating rooms and rooms that could be rented by the official parties. There were side rooms that were like lecture halls, just like in university. I went to one lecture on Indigenous clean energy microgrids in Northern Canada. It was one of two major Canadian ones that I got to go to. And then there's a whole pavilion section, so people could pay to have pavilions. So World Health Organization had one, a bunch of NGOs had one, and strangely, Saudi Arabia had one, Qatar had one, Dubai had one, like these oil countries. And in the Qatar one, they were showing off the new soccer stadiums.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
So it was, there was some people who were there to figure out the climate crisis, and a lot of them were. And then there were some who were there who were just showing off their country, and it was interesting to see the differences.
Yeah. Now, I think you also told me that as your group, there were 2 weeks to this. Some people went to the first week and the others went the second week. And then the alternate week you did traveling and stuff.
Yeah.
You had said something about a whole bunch of Teslas that were there. Could you tell us about that? What the heck was happening there?
So for the 2 weeks, so my group in particular, we split up into 2 weeks. So we had enough badges for the first 20 badges for the first week, and then 20 badges for the second week. That way we could get 40 people into the program. Everybody who was attending COP, the 40,000 people, received a travel pass. So it's just a little card, like a Presto card, but it was free travel for any public transportation in Scotland. It was amazing. I went up to the Highlands afterwards on the train. It was great. But the official world leaders, of course, they can't take public transportation due to security reasons. So they were given Teslas, and they were all staying at a resort slightly out of town. And Teslas, you know, they're good, whatever. No comment on Teslas in particular. But where were they charging? They were connected to the grid properly. They were being charged by diesel generators.
But it looked good. The publicity looked good driving around in Teslas, I guess.
Well, a lot of it is show, right? A lot of it is blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, I found hope in it because of those 40,000 people, a lot of them were there to actually make changes. And a lot of them are actively doing changes on the ground. The system above them isn't changing fast enough. It is changing, and it's being forced to change. Climate change is forcing it to change, but it's not changing fast enough. But there's people on the ground, like everyone here at this meeting, who are actively trying to do something. And everybody, a lot of those people who are observers, they were going home, and just like I'm doing this presentation here, I'm hoping half of them are doing similar presentations to talk about what they saw and to inspire action to do more climate change, more climate action.
Okay. I'm going to end my interview thing pretty soon, but maybe close with this. You had these morning devotion times. You talked about one thing you learned about in the midst of all this craziness and chaos that's coming. You had one session where you talked about still having hope. And what was that all about?
So hope. A lot of people think that hope is this emotion. Hope being an emotion, your emotions go up, they go down. You can have hope, you can have despair. And if you think of hope as an emotion, it's a roller coaster. But from what we learned about hope in these devotional times was hope isn't actually an emotion. Hope is a discipline, a daily discipline where you're taking action. And by doing those actions that hopefully lead to a better future, you have hope.
Hmm. So hope is an action. It's not, okay.
It's a discipline of actions.
A discipline of action. Okay, good. I like it. I like it. Yeah. Okay. Now, thank you for that. It gives a little flavor of what the heck you were experiencing there. Now, we're going to turn it over to anyone here who's got any question at all about what Rob saw, or any question that relates to what he saw and maybe relates to here in Ottawa. That's fine too. So if you'd like to make a comment, make a question, say anything, just wave your hand or press on this little button thing. Anyway, however you do it, it's fine. But here's your chance to have your say. I see ML is starting it off. Mary Laura.
Yes, Rob, thank you very much for that presentation. It's fascinating to hear from what's happening and all the various aspects of it. And you just talk about hope, and I'm really, I like that definition very much. And I thought about you as a young father. How do you apply hope to your young family?
Well, without hope, it looks really scary. So by applying hope as a discipline and teaching them, Gabriel, do you want to come here? Gabriel, come here. Come here. Come here. Gabriel just snuck into the room. So Gabriel, he just snuck into the room, and I'm trying to expose him not only to the negative of climate change, but of the positive actions that we're taking. I'm hoping that when I'm old and he looks back on it, he can see that I did everything I possibly could. So regardless of what happens and regardless of what the outcome is, I did everything I could. And if everybody does everything we can mitigate this thing down to the point that it's manageable. If you look 200 years ago, the world economy, 250 years ago, the world economy wasn't on fossil fuels at that time. The world economy was powered by slave labor. People were stolen from Africa, kidnapped. They were brought to the Americas. They were forced to work. They made tobacco. They grew tobacco, cotton, sugarcane, and many other crops. And they were abused and killed and tortured in the process. People saw that this was bad. They saw that it was morally wrong. They saw the moral component of it. And a small group of people stood up to it and led to change. And it took 50 years in the British parliamentary system, but a law was passed and it outlawed the slave trade in the British Empire. The Americans went through a much harder time with it than the British Empire did in that sense. But action by a small group of people, but persistent action, it can lead to change.
Yeah, it's interesting because, there are people who decided that they won't have children. And then some people decide, yes, I will have children because they are the hope. And if you train them, if you teach them, if you give them the tools to survive, then and to find solution possibly, and to be leaders in harder times, Is that something that you kind of agree with?
I always felt that I wanted to have kids. So regardless of climate change, we had kids. There are many people who don't want to have kids because of climate change, and they don't want to put their kids into a potential catastrophe. And that's a very valid decision on their part. But for us, we felt that we were going to have kids and we're going to do the best we can with it.
Good. Well said. Well said. Anyone else want to make a comment, pose a question?
Judy.
Emmanuel, I think.
Judy.
See Judy raising her hand.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you. Rob, first I'd like to say thanks for making that comment about the moral component. I think very often when we're talking climate change, that moral component is often left out of the discussion. So I want to first comment and thank you for that comment. Secondly, I'm wondering about the green zone.
Yeah.
Because I watched a lot of videos from a group called COP26 Coalition, which I'm assuming were taken in the green zone. And so I'm just wondering if you could give us like a juxtaposition between the blue zone and the green zone, and if you spent much time in the green zone.
I did not spend a lot of time in the green zone. I did spend an afternoon there. I felt that I was privileged to have a pass to get into the blue zone. So I wanted to utilize that pass where other people couldn't and bear witness to it. The blue zone had lots of meeting rooms, as well as it had presentation spaces and pavilions. And in the pavilions, a lot of presentations were going on. Like Catherine Hayhoe would give a presentation, or John Kerry would be giving an interview or something like that. What happened in the green zone was very similar. In the green zone, there were a lot of NGOs set up with various stalls. There's actually a corporate set up there. Well, JSK, GlaxoSmithKline, was a healthcare one. And I don't see a lot of pharmaceuticals getting involved in this and a lot of healthcare involved. So that I kind of I zeroed in on this, and there's meter dosed inhalers or puffers, and 100 puffs is equivalent to driving 300 kilometers in a car because of what is in it and the manufacturing process behind it. And JSK did a carbon audit on themselves and found that the manufacturing of these meter dose inhalers accounted for 50% of their carbon footprint. So they actively tried to change something with that. So I found that really interesting that there were some corporations who were actually taking this seriously. There were other presentations going on there, panels going on. There was a theater going on with films playing. I didn't spend much time there. It was a long ways away from the blue zone. Emmanuel there, if everyone goes to his little thing, it shows the green zone is on the other side of the river from the blue zone. And the blue zone is this ginormous section, and this green zone is this little section on the other side of the river that you have to walk for like 2 or 3 kilometers around to get to. So that kind of is the difference between them. In the blue zone, it felt like a giant university campus. There was like lectures going on all the time. It was really interesting. Does that answer your question? And not very well, I'm sure, but
No, it does. I'm just wondering, because when I'm looking at a lot of the media or the actual protest or the activist side of things, like there were people saying that they had trouble, even if they had passes, like the security and getting into the blue zone was difficult.
Yes.
And so a lot of people that couldn't make it to in security ended up in the green zone. And from what I'm gathering is most of the activists were in the green zone. Am I correct in that part, or were there people in the blue zone that were actually doing protests and marches as well?
I wouldn't say that's the case. I would say there was a lot of protests going on almost at all hours just outside the gate of the blue zone.
Okay.
That's where a lot of the activists were outside the blue zone. Official observers can get into the blue zone, and I was part of one stunt for climate justice where we had a blank check, said overdue on it, and gave out all this money to adaptation and mitigation in a single coin going to climate finance for the developing world. So but they had to be approved by the UN Secretariat. They had to be officially approved. And I heard stories that at the previous COP, a whole bunch of observers were really tired of the blah, 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 and had a big protest inside the blue zone. The blue zone got shut down for the entire day, and the observers no longer had the right to go in and observe anymore en masse. Okay. So there was this, people were there, they were talking, they were encouraging, and they were talking about it. But at the same time, they were being respectful in how, not respectful, because activists are being respectful too, but like they were playing by the rules. Outside, they weren't playing by the rules as much. There was a guy in a kilt there talking about British imperialism, and he was very articulate and he was amazing, but he was outside the blue zone screaming through a bullhorn in a kilt. And that kind of stuff is going on the outside. It was really interesting to see the differences like that. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much, Rob.
Okay, maybe Emmanuel, did you have something? You're muted. You're still muted.
Emmanuel, you're muted.
There.
There we go.
Twice.
Hey.
Press twice on it. Okay. All right. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for being a witness. You know, I don't think you should worry too much about the carbon footprint for the airplane, right? Because I can't imagine these 9 other people on this call, you know, taking each a separate plane to go there because they don't have the eyes and ears on site. So now we do have eyes and ears on site. So that means that we don't have to pollute as much.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Keep things in perspective. You were in the blue zone. Were you right next to diplomats from other countries, or are they in a bluer zone inside the blue zone?
So when the world leaders were present, the observers weren't allowed into the plenary sessions and the official section. When the world leaders were present, they would walk right past down the hallway, just like in a major corridor at a university. They'd go right past. The African dictators would have this huge entourage of people with them marching in their military regalia, and you get blocked out of the way like that while they walked past. Mark Carney walked by with a small entourage of media around him, but it was not the same deal.
Okay.
I missed Trudeau. I didn't get to see him. I got a selfie with another leader of another opposition group, and he was just taking the subway just like all of us were. I saw John Kerry walk by right within meters of me. Who else? I got up. I could have gone and talked right with Stephen Guilbeault. I asked him a question and I really didn't feel like I needed to follow up with him after the question. I talked with a couple of his staffers though. The question I asked was about healthcare. So the NHS actually, it has a plan to decarbonize their healthcare by 2040 and decarbonize healthcare's supply chain by 2045. And I asked basically what were they doing in Canada? So both on the energy front and of the buildings, because we have lots of old buildings for our hospitals, etc. And then also from a plastics and garbage waste, because like I'll do a dressing change on a patient and I'll go through like I'll fill up half of a garbage with garbage just from a simple dressing change, things like that. So I asked about that and he referred back to the single-use plastics that goes into effect soon, that law. So nothing really for the healthcare. And he talked briefly that Natural Resources Canada, Jonathan Wilkinson's group portfolio is going to be dealing with the building infrastructure, and he kind of brushed that off as well. But Dr. Courtney Howard, she hounded him, and she got him to sign on to an agreement to decarbonize healthcare. So whether these are words, whether that's followed up by action, we have 20 years of inaction following pretty words, so who knows? But the words are on paper.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
Rob.
And you answered my next question too about the CEO of Canada Corporation, Justin Trudeau. So that's good. Everybody's laughing.
So one thing, if there's no question right now, one thing that I thought I would mention is how climate change and healthcare are connected. So in Zimbabwe, if they're having water scarcity, the women are usually the ones who go to fetch water, and they're walking 4 hours a day to find water. So the young girls going 4 hours a day to find water. While they're going to find water, they're not getting education. That's 4 hours they're not in school. And there's all the health outcomes and development outcomes that are neglected when you're not going to school, especially for girls. On top of that, there's a high risk of gender-based violence or getting sexually assaulted on the way. And that leads to sexually transmitted infections, that leads to forced unwanted pregnancies and forced marriages. In other countries like Kenya, when they're going through a drought, there was a girl there, a woman there, she's from the Maasai group, and the Maasai farmers, they're not able to generate a profit because there's drought going on. So in order to have an exchange of wealth, they'll sell off their, they'll marry off their daughters for an exchange of wealth. If you look at the Syrian crisis, look at all the people stuck in refugee camps and look at the health impacts of that. And that's in the developing world. If you look in Canada, well, if you look at air pollution, a recent study says it kills 9 million people worldwide annually from air pollution. There's an old number from 2012 that said 7 million, but a new number I found says 9 million. So, and that's from the soot and the particle matter from air pollution. So COVID right now has a death toll around 5 million. So 9 million annually from air pollution. And that's not just climate change, that's directly from air pollution. So 815 people died in BC during the heat dome. And that's from heat stroke and heat related illnesses. So those are like some of the health impacts, and that's often due to social isolation. So elderly stuck in their apartments, young babies, as well as people often with mental health issues and substance use disorders. They're a lot of the ones who are being affected by the heat illnesses. And one thing I learned that was interesting was with the heat related illnesses, it causes an electrolyte imbalance, and that leads to kidney damage. So there's the immediate, but then there's all the long-term effects that these heat illnesses can also lead to. asthma. There was in that Indigenous Clean Energy meeting, presentation. There was a lady from the a Cree First Nation in the Athabasca region, and fracking is going on there and oil extraction, and as well as smoke, and they have no animals left, or a lot less animals in their traditional lands for hunting. They have, she and her children all have asthma. So there's a rise in asthma and respiratory illnesses. Yeah, those are some of the interesting things I learned. One thing with the Indigenous Clean Energy Program, they profiled a First Nation, the Vantu Gwich'in First Nation from Old Crow, way up north in Yukon. And they implemented solar. And with the solar project they put in, they don't need to run their diesel generators all summer. So all of a sudden, it went from being loud in the community to being quiet, and they could hear wildlife again. Yeah. And they're being dramatically affected because their caribou has changed. They don't have caribou going through as much. Just in Labrador, there's a ban on hunting caribou, and that's affecting the Inuit in the northern Labrador. Permafrost is thawing, and that's causing collapse, and that's causing infrastructure damage. With that infrastructure damage, you have to go and pay for more maintenance, but already there's a housing crisis up in the north. And with a housing crisis up in the north, if you have buildings that are there and then they're getting destroyed because the permafrost thaws, well, it's so much harder to build. And then all the communicable diseases that is exasperated. So there's a huge health angle to this and a huge human suffering angle. You know, and I think speaking to the human suffering, that connects people to the climate crisis in a way that some abstract, oh, we're at 414 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and we're at, what was it, 280 or something pre-industrial? Who knows what that means? Who cares what that means? There's somebody who's suffering from something, that puts a face on it, and that's really powerful to communicate with.
Thank you, Rob. If you as a male nurse certainly makes the important link between health aspects and the climate crisis. Thank you very much. It's a complex, multifaceted thing, but thank you for stressing that. I want to move on to ML. She's got a point, I think.
Oh, sorry, I talked too much.
That's all right.
No, it's good.
It's interesting. You talk a lot about healthcare, and I think that is a very, very valid point as to all the damages that are being done with our changing climate. And I was reading an article on, as you talk about the NHS having that, deciding to work on decreasing the amount of CO2 that they're emitting, and starting a coalition of countries. And as apparently Canada was asked to be part of it, and they were not part of the first signers of the first coalition, but finally, apparently, Guilbeault kind of decided to finally get on board. So what do you see about the kind of impact that could have in Canada? Do you think that there really going to be some action on that?
Well, Dr. Courtney Howard, the one who I met at one of those meetings, she was the one who really pressed him hard. Mm-hmm. And she can be thanked for that. She's an ER doctor from up in Northwest Territories and Yellowknife. Healthcare is one of those industries where there is so much waste and there is so many carbon emissions. Both here in urban areas, but also if you expand that up to caring for Indigenous First Nations up north, that is just it's multiplied by magnitudes up, when you're trying to provide healthcare up there. There is so much room, and it is such a large emitting industry. And in healthcare, when somebody comes into Emerge, somebody is having a heart attack. That heart attack is going to kill them right now. You may not worry about antiseptic as much on various things because an infection is going to kill them 5 days later, 6 days later, 10 days later. That heart attack is going to kill them now. Who cares if it's not the most sterile technique you're using for whatever procedure? You're worried about this right here. You're not worried about the infection down the road. When you're worried, so healthcare has that mindset. If you're doing something right now, like wearing all the PPE for personal protective equipment for COVID, COVID is killing people. It's killing people here and now. Yes, climate change is too, but this is much less abstract. We can see this. So we're wearing masks and we're wearing gloves and gowns and you name it. So healthcare has a mentality where the priority is we deal with the acute crisis first, and we deal with the thing that's going to kill us later if we have time. And it's very easy to put climate change and the climate crisis into it's going to kill us later.
So no long-term vision.
It's not the long-term vision, no. So that has to be, we have to say, look, Lytton burnt to the ground. 815 people died this year from heat. People are dying from smoke inhalation. They're having asthma. It has problems now. And that's why that kind of dialogue has to be directed like that. It's not going to kill us 40 years from now. Back in 1980, yeah, you could probably say that. And a lot of people are stuck in that mentality where it's in the future, it's in the future, it's in the future. It's not in the future now. It's here.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. Thank you again. If we could move on. Jackie, are you still there with your comment? Yeah.
Hi.
Go for it.
Oh, mute your computer. Sorry.
Echo.
Sorry, my aunts and I are in the same room. Anyways, thank you so much for giving the presentation. That was so wonderful. I wanted to ask a little bit about the narrative that you were witnessing within the Blue Zone, because I know a lot of the clips that have been circulating coming out of talks with like the delegates and world leaders, a lot of it is kind of non-binding, really vague agreements and superficial sorts of actions that allow them to kind of consider on like the route we're down. They're like more so market-based or like in like the potential for developing technology just to allow us to continue down like the high consumption route we're on and not really like addressing like systemic change that's needed. So I was wondering if you noticed within those conversations in the Blue Zone, if there was any talk about transformational change or of reduction of consumption rather than just adapting and innovating and that sort of narrative, if that made sense.
I would say that 40,000 people there, all with different views. So some people were very much on, we need to stop polluting. Other people were, I wasn't talking for a long time with the politicians writing the agreements. I was talking with Mike Morris for an hour, and he has power, but he isn't Stephen Guilbeault. He doesn't have Stephen Guilbeault's power. Stephen Guilbeault's narrative was, what's coming out of this is way better than when I first started attending COP. And one of the 79-year-old in our group, he was over the moon with what happened at this COP. He thought that so much happened compared to previous COPs. I was at a plenary session where I was listening to Alok Sharma, and he was the president of the COP. And he kept saying 1.5 to stay alive, 1.5 to stay alive. And I was at a presentation where they were talking about the Powering Past Coal Alliance, trying to phase out coal, or as India made the modification, phase down coal and watered down the line. And the guy who was in charge of the International Energy Agency, I think that's the right acronym, I think that's it. He said that the measures that they're putting in place would keep warming at 1.8. 1.8 obviously is not 1.5. He was immediately followed up by a delegate from Africa who said these measures are putting us at I think it was 2.7 warming. It really depends who you're talking to and what the narrative is. I personally think we need to reduce consumption a lot. I don't think that technology is going to be the big winner on this. I think we need to, I've been doing some work on bike infrastructure. I think we need bike infrastructure, quality public transportation. And we do live in a large country, so where public transportation will fail, then for those cases have electric vehicles. Or have maybe one electric vehicle per family that needs to travel beyond where public transit won't take them, and otherwise public transit and bike should be our focus, like the Scandinavian countries. That's my vision. Is my vision the same as everybody else's? No, it's not. But some people are going to trust heavily in technology. I heard that the New York Times they do a 30-minute podcast every day. I've never listened to it, but they did one on COP, and during the podcast, ExxonMobil ran an ad making all these claims about the carbon capture technology they're going to have. So, and obviously that's bogus and greenwashed. There's a lot of talk about greenwashing, especially by the developing nations. They're saying all these big companies are greenwashing what they're saying. They're saying, oh yes, it's green. Just like when you go and you get some packaging where it's in like the plastic wrapper, and they say, oh, this is green because it's less weight, and therefore we're able to have less carbon emissions. And yet this plastic wrapper, it's single use, is going to end up in the garbage and probably end up in an ocean somewhere and swallowed by a fish or who knows what. So that's greenwashing. So you have to be very discerning when you're listening to it, and who you're listening to and what they're saying. It's not perfect, but I did take hope away from this. There is action that is starting to be systemic. And there's a lot of people on the ground level who are trying to make change, just like everybody in this group.
I think that's a key point. Like you were saying, like obviously there's a diversity of narratives, so that's good to hear. I think, like you're saying, a lot of those more critical approaches do tend to come from grassroots activism. But the thing is, when there is a group of united individuals who form a collective, hopefully that can bring hope. And also the fact that we've all been so critical of COP26, yet you were saying that one of the older gentlemen there was saying how much better it was compared to previous years. I think that's reflective of what you were saying about how there is change, it's just not happening fast enough, because a lot of the things that are coming out of this conference still seem quite insufficient to address what we're facing, yet there's been evolution, so something's starting to happen.
Before I went to this conference, I emailed some of my local politicians, and my member of parliament, David McGuinty, he called me.
Oh, he's in.
And David McGuinty called me, and he said that the Liberal Party's stance on it is they don't want to overpromise and underact. I'm using the wrong word, but overpromise and underact. Because what's that?
Overpromise and underdeliver.
Underdeliver, that's it. Thank you. Overpromise and underdeliver. That's what they don't want to do. And with the Paris Agreement, so Kyoto Agreement, it was a lot of, here are the rules. If you don't follow the rules, we're going to whack you with a stick. Paris Agreement, it's a lot more, each country comes up with their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. And then the idea is we're supposed to compete with different NDCs, and everybody's supposed to compete with how ambitious they are. For instance, we're able to say, look at the NHS. They're going to decarbonize by 2040 and supply chain by 2045. Canada, what are you doing? You know, like, there is that kind of using that ambition carrot rather than the stick. So yeah, our targets are crap right now. 40 to 45% is totally insufficient for Canada right now. But with those targets, if we actually abide by them, it's a start, and hopefully we can accelerate that. And with more people like everybody who's in this room or virtual room, we can demand more and we can get those accelerated once they start delivering. But we have to make sure they deliver first on their crappy targets and then do more afterwards.
Well said. Okay. As we're coming to a close, anyone else? I think I see John. Is that John back there with his hand up, or was he just stretching? I don't know. Well, go for it if you want to make a last comment. We're listening.
Linda has someone who wants to ask a question.
I'm sorry. Oh, there's Mary.
Mary also has a question.
Mary's got her hand up. Mary Gerard, you're on, Mary. You got to unmute yourself, though.
It's a classic.
Whoops, she disappeared. Oh, no.
Sorry, my mouse doesn't want to work. Okay, I'm sorry I missed part of what you were talking about. I got in late and then I was distracted by other tasks. But it was about the military emissions, and I surely don't see Canada at all wanting to mention that, but at least it was brought up at the COP, and I was wondering if you had any comments about that. And of course, the new fighter jets that Canada wants to purchase for $88 billion will be extremely intensive fossil fuel use. And I don't know if that was part of what you maybe talked about at all, but it was at least good, I think, that it was brought up at COP, and I was hoping that you could comment on that and what we need to do here in Canada and how we can collaborate between the climate movement and the people against the military spending and against war in general. I could just say that I came up with a quote that at a webinar I was at earlier today, and it was, war causes climate change and climate change causes war. And I thought, oh, I should remember that, because how true it is. And I don't know if you at all want to comment on that.
So first of all, I personally am quite a pacifist. But I need to disclose two things. I didn't go to any presentations about the military and climate change at COP. And the second thing is, a lot of my family is military background. So with my comments on that, I'm going to say that with climate change, the Arctic is going to open up a lot. And as from a security standpoint, we're going to have a lot of the Arctic being open waters all summer long, and people are going to be able to take their ships up there and do whatever. If our military and our Coast Guard isn't able to police our own waters, then we are going to have Russia coming into our waters, doing whatever they want with it. We're going to have other fishing vessels coming in and not obeying by our Canadian law. People could be spilling things and dumping things. I don't think we should be going to other countries and starting war. I don't think we should be involved in war in other countries. But we do need to be able to police our own land and our own area and make sure that environmental and conservation rules are followed. And we need a sufficient military to be able to deal with that. And now that's one point. And that's adapting to it. Now you have to also mitigate it so we don't have all these problems. And you look at all the trucks coming down from Petawawa and other stuff. There are these big gas guzzling trucks. There is no respect. Well, they're just as in healthcare, we're caring about the acute crisis. In military, they're concerned with training and other stuff, and the environment comes far distant second or third or fourth or fifth afterwards. And there needs to be a lot of action done there. So I don't know the solution. we're going to have to be able to police our waters and make sure that our waters are safe and clean up north, and that we can maintain sovereignty over them, so that we can make sure that the rules are followed, because many other countries don't follow the rules. But we also have to deal with the crisis at hand as well. Did that answer your question at all?
Well, it's more your opinion, I guess I'm getting, rather than the need to reduce the carbon footprint of military in general. And yeah, and the amount of money spent on military, which is, we call it defense, but it's really mostly offense. You know, the amount of money spent on that could solve the pandemic problems, and it could solve a lot of the third world, you know, the poorer countries need to mitigate the effects of climate change. So I'm thinking we need to spend our money differently from what we're spending it on. And I don't agree with the security thing, but that's a different issue altogether. We're talking about climate change. We're not talking about whether or not you believe, and I don't like the word policing, because it's a one world that we're living in, and we all have to work together. So there's no policing this and that and the other thing. It's we all need to work together. And anyway, that's my opinion. So, but that aside, the bootprint of Canada's military is extreme. The carbon bootprint is extremely large.
It is, yeah.
And it needs to be addressed.
It wholeheartedly does.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't witness anything there in particular. I only have my opinion to offer. So.
Okay. Thank you both for bringing that up. It's a huge problem. And the military, of course, hides its statistics of how much carbon pollution is going. That's a big problem. It's a monstrous problem. We won't solve it here, but thank you for raising it. And I also, maybe we're coming to an end, I'm assuming no one's got a burning comment. If they do, here's your last chance.
I just wanted to continue to comment on that military thing. And my understanding is that no country is reporting on their military CO2 contribution. None.
Not that I know of.
And what happens, from what I read also, is that most rich countries, as a matter of fact, building up more military capabilities, because they're pretty much aware of what's coming up. And they know that with the individualistic attitude that we have developed over the last 40 years, that it's going to be a free for all. And that there will be no compassion, no working together, etc. So the military, in fact, are going to spend even more on the new equipment and new people, etc. And so getting a higher CO2 emission for sure. And I worked 28 years in the military, and I can tell you that yes, there is some environmental concerns, and certain things have been addressed. But as far as the capability of the military, there's not going to be anything to hold them back.
Yeah, agreed. It's very scary. The military is scary. It's a huge problem. It has to be opposed in every which way we can come up with. Agreed on that. I think in the way of closing, and I would say I was impressed with Jackie said, what is coming down the tube is we have to reduce our consumption. And certainly that's true of the military. It's got to be reduced instead of expanded in some way. But as I think of the future, with all our technologies, we're talking to an affluent part of society telling us that we have to reduce our consumption abruptly and radically. I think we're in for a really rough time, folks. It's more chaotic than we know. And this is what we're facing. But that's the negative thing. It's going to be rough. It's not going to be simple, and we know that. But there's some good news. And that is that people are waking up to this around the world. I don't know if you know about the investment in fossil fuels and the investment in military, but the investment in fossil fuels has now reached globally, worldwide, $15 trillion have been pulled out of the fossil fuel industry. So, and the fossil fuel industry knows this. Unfortunately, they're diverting their industry to single-use plastics, which is not good. But there is a lot of disinvestment going on. And also, there's a wonderful book called A Blessed Hope, talking about hope. And this guy went all around the world. He said there's about a million little groups, like this is one here, or more than one here, that are all working away on the environmental problem. I think it is gathering steam. And there's some hope. We may be on the crest of a wave. I just hope it gets faster and bigger in time. So thank you, Rob, very much for bringing us your perspective on this, what it's like to be at Co-op. And also, Jackie's going to close this in a minute, but we thought one thing we can have an action. Well, one action is this coming Monday, starting at 9 o'clock, there's going to be a lot of people trying to speak to the government. I know World Beyond War is going to be there. Stop all this military madness and don't buy these jets, which are mainly used for offense, not defense. But there's always going to be all kinds of environmental groups, the Suzuki Foundation, the Council of Canadians, Extinction Rebellion, OSAG, and others. So it's going to be a big event. And what action you could have, try and get out there and bring a few friends with you. 9 o'clock, Prime Minister's office, Wellington and Elgin, or Wellington and Metcalfe, somewhere. Let's really make a statement and say, it's the environment. It's got all kinds of these facets. Do something, please. That would be an action that could come out of this. You bring all your friends too. Oh, look at all those hands going up.
Eric, can I add 2 things?
Yes, go ahead.
So
Close it up.
I didn't go to this, but because I couldn't get tickets, it was sold out immediately. But a few of my colleagues went to it. It was a talk by Bill Mckibben. And Bill Mckibben, he's a retirement age environmentalist now, climate activist for decades. He started an organization called 350 because he wanted to keep carbon emissions at 350 parts per million. We're now at 414, by the way. And he was saying there's a difference between young activists and old activists. Young activists, a lot of people, like, I'm a nurse. If I get arrested at something, it might implicate my nursing and I can't help people with nursing. He was saying all of the older activists, if they get arrested, it doesn't really matter because they're at the end of their career or they're retired. So I'm putting pressure here on Eric. Eric, you can do something crazy.
Good.
Second thing you can do, which I think is the most important thing, is talk to people. Talk to people about climate change. A lot of people are uncomfortable because it's so political and politically charged. But you have to show where the humanity comes in. And you have to show that if we don't do something, it's going to really affect humanity. What is it? It's code red for humanity, right? We have to talk about it. So talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. That's the most important thing you can do. If public pressure has to sway in such a way that the politicians will follow. So we need to talk about it. If the public wants it, the politicians will follow and system change will happen if they can agree on it. Yeah. So talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. Eric, do you want to finish up?
No, I'm going to let Jackie finish up, but thank you, Rob. Thank you for your insights and thank you for sharing with us. Jackie, it's over to you to close.
All right, awesome. That was wonderful. Thank you again, Rob, for coming out. That was so great to have you. So great to have your inside perspective. We really appreciate it. So I guess I'll just finish by thanking everyone for coming out and also by reminding people, I think most of you here are already part of our organization, but about our action on Monday at 9 a.m. in front of the Prime Minister's office. Manuel actually put in the chat the details to the event if you wanted to follow that link, and you can get more information there. And I would encourage you all to go, if you're not already, to the Extinction Rebellion Ottawa Facebook page or XR Ottawa on Instagram, which we have been updating, and you can stay in the loop on any future actions that we have or anything that we're organizing. Because like I think a big theme of today's conversation, we need to work together. to make this happen. So let's do that. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Rob. That was wonderful.
My pleasure.